America. Can you provide some insight on the importance and need for financial professionals who have knowledge in social and natural systems, as well as expertise in sustainability, finance, and data analytics for ESG reporting?
I think that's something that is an expectation that's going to become very much standard as time goes on. We're at a phase in my mind right now where there are a lot of people in the room who all know specific things about what they're working on, but the struggle is always getting them all on the same page, speaking the same language, understanding the same terminology, and realizing each other's struggles and what everybody is trying to accomplish. And I think, a really easy example to think about is the concept of greenhouse gases and emissions reduction. It's a very technical topic. It gets very detailed, and you're going to have someone probably with an engineering or environmental background who's very well versed in this, but they need to be able to take that information and translate it to their asset manager or their CFO or their COO to say, I need this much money, or I need this commitment in resources, or I need this many years of planning to support this initiative. And if that bridge doesn't exist where this person and this person both understand the concepts and the principles and the reasoning for these projects or for this work, then it's like lost in translation. So as we speak, there are tons of organizations coming up with different types of frameworks to report on carbon accounting and to find more and more ways to take ESG, labeled organizations or any organization that claims to be supporting ESG initiatives and actually measure those initiatives. How are you proving that you actually do this? And these are people who have financial backgrounds or who come from reporting backgrounds that now have to understand these concepts so they can report on them. And they're going to have to work with the really technical people on the team to translate, again, that information into data that can then be digested by an investor who may not be very technical, but needs to understand the issues. So there's a lot of bridging that needs to happen. And within an organization, every decision maker ultimately will need to understand these concepts and will need to be able to speak knowledgeably and literately about what's going on in these spaces. So I can only see it becoming more and more of an expectation that people will understand the concepts. I think there will absolutely be a range in terms of the depth of knowledge in different subjects. A finance person will still be expected to be a finance person, an engineer will still be expected to be an engineer, but the two of them should have this common common denominator of knowledge when it comes to sort of, call it ESG initiatives, where they'll be able to meet and create plans and solutions together. Because ultimately, if you read, and I can't quote any numbers off the top of my head, but the amount of investment that's going into different types of ESG projects is huge. So everybody's going to get involved. If they're not involved already, they will be involved later. And I think that's a sentiment that, as we read the news and as we look at large organizations, it's becoming very apparent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you do bring a great point in terms of the diversity of expertise, but having that same common lexicon, to have that same common language, to be able to speak and work collaboratively. And I'm sure the other big challenge is, as ESG standards are becoming more and more solidified and defined, there's also the big question of how do you measure intangibles like diversity? We all know that it's to a business's benefit to have a diversity of perspectives from a range of expertise, but how do you measure the value of that diversity? How do you measure the value of being good to the environment as an organization? So those are some of the interesting challenges, and also bringing back the lifelong learning to
always learning. But people are doing incredible work on all those fronts. Like, there are just tons and tons of resources available. to learn about all of this. And that's why, for, call it, I don't know, my generation or those before me, where, there wasn't a program like sustainability and financial management, for example, we still have access to this information. We have access to people, to consultants, to resources that can educate us. But imagine how much faster it'd be if you had just had that background walking into the room, and you were comfortable already. You're starting at a different point in the conversation, which I think should be expected in the climate that we're operating in today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely the need for graduates who are cognizant and have not just that foundational knowledge of accounting and finance, but also the social and natural systems in order to really help build that diverse perspective in an organization. And like you said, step in already having that foundation and being able to get going.
Yeah, and I think, one of the big underlying, principles around ESG is that everything we talk about in ESG will eventually be reflected in your performance, your financial performance, one way or another. So, being able to digest that and say like, okay, I understand the numbers, but now I'm going to really understand all the things that contribute to this performance beyond, the kind of traditional metrics. That's really where ESG is trying to bring people, right, is to understand that there are a lot of things that are valuable and contribute to your performance, like happy employees, a healthy environment. These things add value, and even if it's not obvious, it's not like, a happy employee adds $10 or something. Like, you can't really quantify like that, but that doesn't mean that value is not there. And I think, we're in a journey right now where we're trying to, like you said, find ways to measure all of these things, because we know that they are important, and they will all eventually come through in a company's performance.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.